And so how do you distinguish between the kind of immigration that has brought you the people that you have had friendships with in Luton, and the what is it? Is it the grooming gangs that's drawing the distinction? Like, what is it that you're trying to tell people about immigration, given that you also have friends from all sorts of different ethnic groups and races? And you're also denying any allegations of racism or even ethnic prejudice for that matter. And partly you point to the fact that your English Defence League had different groups of people in it, but also your own friendships. So what makes you convinced that you're not a far right figure? And what is it specifically about immigration that you're trying to object to?
I'm not denying it. I'm actually hated by the far right. I'm despised as a race traitor. As I've made comments, so Angela Merkel, David Cameron, these were all the leaders at the time of the English Defence League. They all come out and said multiculturalism's failed. I went on record as saying, actually, you're all cowards, yeah? Because what's failed, if we want to admit what's failed, Islam's failed. Yeah? Sikhism hasn't failed to integrate or assimilate into British society. The Jews haven't failed. St. Lucians haven't failed. Everyone else, they haven't failed. You are taking a problem that what's failed, and I just speak about my experience from growing up in Luton. And again, I'll set the record straight. Not every Muslim, okay? I'm not saying every Muslim. Some of the best people I've met growing up are Muslim. Some of the people I love and still have relationships are Muslim. But per se, Islam and the community of Islam have looked inward. They've created ghettos, and there is no integration. And I challenge any journalist, come to Luton and find me Muslims with non-Muslims. And every time when I was leading the English Defence League and a journalist would come and interview me, I said, you walk through the town and you try and find me Muslims with non-Muslims. You won't find them. You'll have the Muslims and the non-Muslims. Now, we didn't create that. We can't be, on our school, I speak about when I grew up, it was the Muslim playground and the non-Muslim playground. So I grew up experiencing this. I experienced the separation and the segregation, the zero assimilation. And I knew something was very, very different. And until, I think in 2011, I was spending 22 weeks of solitary confinement. And I challenge again, anyone listening to do this. Take the Quran. I was sent in the Quran by a Muslim outreach organisation trying to convert me. So I took the Quran and thought, right, let's look at this. And I opened it and I challenge any of you to do this. And every time it says, do not be friends with Christians or Jews, just write the verse number. You will have pages and pages of verse numbers. So then what you have is children being brought up. And if I brought my children up, and all of us as white people brought our children up to do not be friends with black children, we would see hostility and violence sooner. When you have a superior ideology that teaches them they're better than people based on the colour of their skin or their faith. And that's what Islam is. It's a supremacist ideology. And all of a sudden, when I started dissecting this book, everything I'd seen my entire life growing up made sense. Everything. And these Muslims are being brought up to believe this, to believe that this is the word of God, that this is what they want. That's why we don't have assimilation or integration. So when I talk about the problems, I've only ever I haven't spoke against immigration, which is why I'm under attack by people who are against total immigration. Quite currently, right now, I believe we need to end immigration. But the whole time I led the English Defence League, I said, no, I'm against Islamic immigration. And that's because you're mixing oil and water and it doesn't work. And I can only speak from experience of what I've seen. The more Islam,
okay, so why is it a problem? Let's assume that at least in part that your argument is valid and that you did experience the Muslim tendency in Luton to be more segregated compared to the other ethnic groups that you're describing. So I could say, well, that's okay. If people want to associate with their own kind as a consequence of their belief, that's part and parcel of a multicultural vision. And so why is it that you object to it? And why even do you have the temerity to object to it? People can associate with who they want. And so then it's not reasonable for you to call out a specific religion, regardless of what it believes. And so what do you think of an objection like that?
Because we have, within that confined Islamic community, and we've had documentaries go down and speak to Muslims in Luton who said, I've never met a non-Muslim. I've never met one. Yeah? They're growing up in Luton. They've never met a non-Muslim. So they're going to go through inward looking, and within that community, it's a problem anyway for integration and assimilation, but within that community, and again, I bring on our last episode, I spoke about Al-Mujahideen. Al-Mujahideen are now a prescribed terrorist organisation, but they never were. And I try to explain it to members of the Muslim community like this. You've got a close-knit Islamic community. And within that close-knit Islamic community, there's a bunch of activists who are active every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This group are active. And they're teaching all the non-Muslims that they're teaching supremacy and violence against non-Muslims, because within that community, that's what's happening. Al-Mujahideen, 60% of terrorists, UK Muslims on terrorism charges or in jail for terrorism, are ex-members of this group. Now, within that community, if you change it to the white community of Luton, and you have the non-Muslim community, and within there you have 1,000 Nazis who have pace tables set up and are continually promoting Nazism, sooner or later the violence is going to come out of that community. Well, that's what we've experienced. We've experienced something we never even understood. We had to learn about jihad before anyone knew what jihad was, because it was being taught. Jihad was being taught as part and parcel with the Islamic community within my town. So all of these problems, and that's not just that, there's so many problems that come from the community. The hostile view, the mainstream hostile view against women, but especially non-Muslim women. Well, those non-Muslim women are my daughter. They're my mum, and they're walking through the streets of Luton. And you've got a community that's promoting a negative view of women, but especially our women. And when you look through the statistics, which I gave in our last interview, where Muslim men make up 2.5% of the British population, they're responsible for 90% of the convictions of groups of men that rape kids. Why? Why is it 90%? And again, if we start looking at Islamic doctrine and we look at the Quran and we look at scripture, we might understand why. But unfortunately, as soon as you try and have that discussion, you're far right, you're racist, or you're extremist. And the people that are calling you that have no knowledge of Islam. They don't know anything about what they're talking about. They don't know Muhammad's teachings. And you're not even allowed to talk about Muhammad's teachings.
America's healthcare system is lacking in any real care. Insurance companies regularly deny progressive treatment options, primary care physicians refuse to order comprehensive lab work, and the standards of care lag years behind the leading research. That's where Merrick Health comes in. Merrick Health represents a paradigm shift in how we approach medicine. The premier health optimization platform, Merrick Health empowers you to maximize your longevity and performance with the confidence that comes from having experts in your back pocket. They offer cutting-edge diagnostic labs, concierge health coaching, and expert clinical oversight. They help you achieve your health and fitness goals by leveraging data-driven lifestyle and nutrition recommendations, along with supplement and prescription treatment options. If you're listening to this show, then you're probably a proponent of taking your health into your own hands. That's why we've teamed up with Merrick Health to offer a turnkey optimization package designed for those who want to maximize their performance and longevity with the most elaborate testing on the market. You'll receive extensive lab work, thorough lab reports, video calls with Merrick's health experts, and expedited onboarding. Go to merrickhealth.com/Peterson and use code Peterson to get the same panel and medical oversight I get, and save 10% at checkout. That's merrickhealth.com/Peterson and use code Peterson at checkout.
Well, sorry, Tommy. Let me bring Tammy into this for a moment. And I'm going to introduce her with a couple of different questions. I mean, there are many forces within the Muslim world that are trying to establish something approximating a détente and a peace with the Western world. That's exemplified most particularly with the Abraham Accords. And the Abraham Accords have stayed intact despite what's happened after October 7th and all the activism on the side of Iran, for example, doing everything it possibly can to destabilize the Western universities and to bring out the demise of the peace process that was established under the Trump administration. And so there are positive forces operating within the Muslim community that are trying to bring something approximating peace. And so it's dangerous to segregate Islam as such. You could make this case, it's dangerous to segregate Islam as such, because if we can't continue to communicate with the moderates, then the more fundamentalist types that are likely misusing what might be a core religious doctrine to push their fundamentalism and their essentially their race hatred and their sadism. And so it's very difficult to walk through that and separate the wheat from the chaff. Tammy, what I wanted to ask you is, like, you insisted before we did that first interview that you trusted Tommy Robinson. And I asked you why, and I want you to reiterate that. And I also want you to tell me if that's still true. And I want to see if you have some questions that you'd also like to levy at him. You've watched what's happened in the last month since we did our interview. And so maybe you could reiterate for people why you thought we should do this interview and what your what drew you to want to talk to Robinson to begin with, and well, what your conclusions have been given what we've gone through in the last month?
Well, first of all, I'd say that I'm for free speech. And I see Tommy as putting a light to issues that nobody else will talk about, and that's important. And he's also outlined his experience personally that has been his guiding light to, it looks like what has been his guiding light in what he has done. I guess my question would be, why is it that Muslim culture has become so strong? And I know that there's lots of people there, but what happened to the Christian? What happened to the Christian word and the Christian values that uphold our societies? I think from my point of view, I think that there's been a disillusion of our Christian values, and so this other more aggressive force has come in and taken the place of what used to be a place of Christianity. And so I think that it's complicated. Yes, I think that immigration isn't as orderly as it was. So now, people are getting into not just the UK, but into Canada, into United States, into Sweden, into lots of different places, and people aren't using their common sense to regulate that. So
And their faith.
common sense and faith. Well, common sense and faith go together in some way, because it means you're using your intuition, which is using something that's smarter than you to find your way, that you're not guiding, but you're finding, it from within your heart to do what's best. And everybody here is now so self-guided that I think we're getting in each other's way more often. And I can't speak for, I've looked at the Quran some, and I am making my way through it. And I agree with you, Tommy, that we should be reading that book, because everybody should know, if we're not going to read the Bible, let's read the Quran. I mean, we have to know what we're up against, and we've left the Bible. We've left the Bible, and we're not going by those values anymore, and so we're going to be lost. And those policemen and those government officials, who are those people? Who are those people that they're not willing to stand up for British values? And they're not willing to tell the truth. Like, what's going on with them? Why don't they have the conviction to be? I mean, these are their families and their communities that are going to suffer if they don't stand up. So what's going on that Tommy has to shout from the rooftops? What's going on with the Muslims?